Hello, friends of Broken Crescent. This is third introduction episode to Broken Crescent Remastered. So we ended last video with the Kypchaks, the humans. So I'm going to show you a campaign and progression. I'll be able this way to show you a little bit more the characters of the faction. So as I said last time, they have this particular peculiar masks, these metallic masks. They have been found in some graves. Their provenance is debated. Sometimes they say they were buying them from the Mongols. It's unclear whether they were making them themselves. There is a trend to show them with these metallic masks. It's more likely that the nobility, the high-ranking warlords of the Kypchaks had these masks. Of course, not everyone. And nonetheless, some of their units have them. So if you play a battle, you'll see some of the units, some of the cavalry has them. And so the captain portrait and the generals have them. So here are some of their generals there. Khan and a set of other generals. So today I will go over a little bit the two factions that remain. So last time I didn't mention much about the Seljuks, the Great Seljuks. I skipped them, I missed them. I will showcase them in this episode. I will then say quite a few things about the Kingdom of Jerusalem, and I'll try to provide some background to the movie Kingdom of Heaven, which of course gave the inspiration both for Broken Crescent and for Kingdom's Crusades. And the characters from that movie and both these modes. So I'll also say a few things, potentially, if there's time in this episode, otherwise in the next episode, about some of the other things that could be done regarding some of the text thing. So the Cuman campaign, as I said, the Kypchak campaign was near the end. So you can see also the various characters here, the diplomats and the rogues, the spies. The Cumans don't get merchants, and they also don't get assassins, which makes their campaign quite difficult. They don't get a lot of trade. At this point, there was the Hordes Unite event to capture all the steppe settlements, and the result of that was that I went totally into the red. So the Kypchak campaign has its ups and downs. It's kind of fun. But the Kypchak Horde Unite event gives you the opportunity to have huge armies with which you can then destroy Georgia and win the campaign. If you're doing a short campaign, the timing is perfect. At around 1200 or so, you get the Horde Unite event. If you capture all the settlements, that's about right. All the settlements in the steppes, and then you can conquer Georgia after that and end the campaign. So that was here, as you see, the Cumans, Kypchaks. So this campaign now is over. So I'm going to then log. Let me just save it. So that in case I need to come back for some reason. And then I'll quit this campaign. It didn't take very long. It took about a day or so. So this campaign is fairly easy, fairly quick, let's say. The end of it was very frustrating. I've been playing on the weekend, so today's Sunday, so yesterday and today. So let's go over the last remaining Islamic faction, the Great Seljuks. I'm going to do this totally live. That will simplify things for me. So as I said, let's go over to the Great Seljuks over here. Let's have a look at their starting characters. So they also have an elderly Sultan Sanjar. And the other characters have the color scheme of the faction. Of course, only the starting characters. As I said, another interesting thing is they have extremely low loyalty. So this was a part of the Islamic world that lapsed into chaos after the collapse of the caliphate, and lots of local rulers turned up, and I think that's why we have such low loyalty for the starting characters of this faction. It sometimes happens that the faction goes rebel. All the starting characters become rebels, and then the entire faction dies out in the first few game turns, 20 game turns or so. Okay, so that was the generals, and the spy, and the diplomat. So I have corrected now in my download of Broken Crescent Remastered, in my upload, the characters. So now they have the colors, the portraits match the colors of the characters. Again, only the starting characters. So if you want to re-download it, you can. If you don't want to do that, just let me know and I can provide this file separately somehow, so you can just have the color matching diplomats. Okay, and so they are a large faction, but a little bit difficult to manage because of the low loyalty of the generals. So that so quite a few settlements to start with. So that concludes all the factions except one. We haven't really covered the Kingdom of Jerusalem. I said a few things during the first episode, but I want to go over the characters and the background. So here are the starting characters. And so what was going on at this time? The king was Baldwin I. He was suffering from leprosy. So he couldn't really marry, and he died very, very young, in his 20s. In the events of the Kingdom of Heaven, is still very much in command of the kingdom, and he fought an amazing battle against Saladdin, where everything went in his favor. He was very lucky. So Saladdin invaded with a very big army, and he was heading for Jerusalem. He left Jerusalem, so Baldwin left Jerusalem, went in the direction of Ascalon, which for some reason is missing. It's an important settlement. I don't know why it's missing. And it was an important fortress at the time. And it was a very highly contested fortress even. And so I don't understand why it is not in the game. But if I do some serious modding, I'm going to add it back in. Or I'm going to add it in. It's ridiculous that Ascalon is missing. And so he went to Ascalon, that was under siege. He managed to somehow kind of disrupt the siege. Then there were some knights in Ascalon and more knights in Gaza, which I believe at the time was actually belonging to the Kingdom of Jerusalem. It wasn't belonging to Saladdin. He got a few knights from there, and then he was heading back this way to Jerusalem. And quite by chance, he stumbled upon the army of Saladdin. And Saladdin did not expect that Baldwin was out kind of gathering his knights or, preparing for a defense of Jerusalem. The whole thing was accidental. And it was the worst possible moment for Saladdin because he was heading up this way along a stream. And it had rained very heavily. I think it was November or October, November or something like that. And it had rained very heavily. And there were very small streams and the place had become very marshy and muddy. And if you consider the huge army he had with camels and everyone was on horses, that was, they would all move on horses, the Ayyubids. Even if they would fight on foot, the majority of them, during movement of the army, they all had horses. And so there was a huge number of horses, you can imagine, thousands, and camels and carts with siege engines and supplies and so on. And they were just using one road among this marshy terrain, and that road just became a mire. And so they were all the baggage train had got stuck in the mud. And while they were trying to free the carts and the baggage from the mud, various parties were sent off in various directions to find food and provisions. And so the army was in a complete disarray. They had no idea that Baldwin was behind them, and Baldwin just probably didn't expect he would stumble upon them, and he stumbled upon them in this terrible state. It was the worst possible moment for Saladdin. And so he just, the Kingdom of Jerusalem army, it was a few knights, not very many, about 80 knights in total. If they would have had the squires and sergeants with them on horse. And then there was obviously some infantry. And they just attacked the army of Saladdin, which was probably a numerically superior army, but totally scattered and totally out-surprised and completely destroyed it. And that was like a huge victory. It's one of the greatest victories that the Kingdom of Jerusalem managed, maybe the only victory even. But even in terms of the history of the Crusades, it was probably the biggest victory ever. And that gave some people a lot of self-confidence, particularly Guy de Lusignan. So what is the story with Guy de Lusignan? The majority of the people living in the Holy Lands were not Franks, they hadn't come from Europe, they were locals. And some of them might have been Muslims, but the majority at this time, a very, very large number, a very large proportion, were Christians. And they belonged to different groups, both religious groups. There were Eastern Christians, Nestorians, there were Standard or Orthodox Christians, there were some Jews, both Jewish-speaking and Christian-speaking and Greek-speaking Jews. There were Maronites, which is a minority that lived to the north of the Kingdom of Jerusalem, around Lebanon and so on. There were Christians that spoke their own language. Of course, they would have spoken other languages, whatever, Greek, Syriac, or who knows what. But they spoke their own language. They were a unique ethnic group. There are Maronites living today in Cyprus. They were expelled after the defeat of the Crusades, the Crusaders, and they now live in Cyprus. And they still speak their language, and they are multilingual, whatever. They probably speak English as well as Greek. And these groups were ruled over by the Crusaders, who were mostly Germanic in background. They were Franks or Normans, not 100%, but Franks or Normans. So the rulers were either Franks or Normans. The Franks were either from Germany, and so the locals would have spoken German, or the rulers were from France, possibly the majority were from France. And so their retinues would have spoken Old French. The Normans would have spoken some sort of French as well. They had settled in the south part of Italy. They would have had Italian troops, obviously, speaking some sort of Italian. And how they communicated with each other, it's all important for the story. How they communicated with each other was in Latin, of course. And the locals then were administered by this Latin aristocracy, Latin-speaking aristocracy. The locals probably wouldn't have known much Latin. Some of them who were Catholic Christians would have known Latin, but not everyone, at least not, it wasn't the most common language in the area. But they were administered by the Latin speaking or Latin writing aristocracy, the rulers, the elite that had come from Europe, the various nobles that had become the elite and the aristocracy. These nobles had a kind of system of administration, and one of the things the system of administration would do was to obviously issue birth certificates to all these disparate peoples from different cultures. And the way that we're doing that, whether it was so previously, it looks like it was the same in the Byzantine Empire, so it might have been a tradition. It was the same in ancient Greece up until this time. It was a tradition to do things that way. When you were born, you had your first name, you had a given name, perhaps you were baptized, and then you would, to discriminate you from other Georges and Michaels and whatever, Marks and Peters and so on, they would say, here's John the son of Peter, here's John the son of Paul, here's John the son of Nicholas, and so on. And in Latin, that was John Marcus Paulus, for example. If your father was Mark, Paulus meant the son of John Marcus Paulus, or Johannes Marcus Paulus, or Johannes Paulus Paulus, or Johannes Alexius Paulus, or whatever. That was the idea. And that was shortened at some point later on in the Middle Ages to names like Markopoulos, Alexopoulos, Philippopoulos, Petropoulos, and so on, which are very common in areas where there were Crusader states, particularly in Cyprus and in the Peloponnese in Greece, these sorts of names. These people were eventually expelled from the Middle East, but also there were Crusader states in Cyprus and the south of Greece. So you find these names also among the Greeks. So we think today they're Greek names, but they are dating from the days of the Crusades. And why I'm saying this is that all these people, the locals, who were given these names, who were nobles, They hadn't come from France or Germany or Italy. They were just the ordinary folk. Because their names ended in polis, they were called Polains in Old French. Of course, a lot of the nobility of the Crusades were speaking also Old French. And so there was this kind of tiered demographic, with the nobility being the majority Franks, and many of them speaking Old French, and then with Latin as a written language. And then the locals who spoke the whole variety of different languages and had various different beliefs, mostly Christian, but not exclusively. There were also, as I said, some Arabs and Turks. The locals were the Polains. And they came into a kind of... They started disliking and distrusting a little bit each other. So the locals, the Polains, started disliking a little bit the aristocracy. It seems so. And something that happened was that Baldwin, when he was quite young, his father died or killed in a battle. I can't remember what happened. But he was left as an orphan, a minor, as a minor. So he wasn't yet of an age to rule. And so the Count of Tripoli, which was an autonomous Crusader state, it was kind of not fully integrated to the Kingdom of Jerusalem, kind of autonomous. And it was, in addition to the Principality of Antioch and the Kingdom of Jerusalem, there was also the County of Tripoli. The County of Tripoli was kind of, very close to the Kingdom of Jerusalem, but it was also behaving in an independent way, and it had its own ruler, the Count of Tripoli, sometimes called also Count of Tripoli and Tiberias, and in this period, that count was Raymond de Tripoli, from the movie Kingdom of Heaven. He had been the regent in the period when Baldwin was a minor. He couldn't rule. And it appears, for whatever reason, the Polains liked him. And it's quite possible that he was so popular, he kind of maybe felt that if Baldwin died because of leprosy, he was the first in line to succeed him, because Baldwin did not have children. But he did have a sister who appears in the movie. His sister was called Sibylla. And at some point he was ailing. And Guy de Lusignan, this guy, was very becoming kind of positioning himself as a potential new heir, and was trying to influence Baldwin to accept, pass the crown to him rather than to Raymond of Tripoli, the Count of Tripoli. The Polains didn't like that. There was a kind of public feeling kind of against Guy becoming the next king of Jerusalem. And without public support, Raymond of Tripoli managed to convince the Principality of Antioch, the Prince of Antioch, to put an army together and march to Jerusalem and get rid of Guy de Lusignan, because they felt he was a bad influence, and he was kind of, was very heavy-handed and was trying to take over or usurp the throne in a way. We don't know exactly whether Baldwin felt the same. We don't know how Baldwin was feeling about Guy de Lusignan, whether he was feeling he was being kind of pressed into accept him as a ruler, or what happened. as his successor. But as the army was marching down, this crusading army was marching down into Jerusalem, it so appears that Sibylla was married to Guy de Lusignan. Sibylla, the sister of Baldwin I, was married to Guy de Lusignan, and Guy de Lusignan was announced the new king of Jerusalem. Baldwin stepped down. He was too ill to continue ruling. And that happened. We have the situation with Sibylla and Guy sort of, being forced to marry Guy, and she seems very unhappy in the movie. Some of that is kind of romanticized, it's no real history. But that was when Baldwin disappears from the movie. We don't see him anymore, and now Guy de Lusignan becomes the ruler of the Kingdom of Jerusalem. Then Guy de Lusignan made the most disastrous decision straight away, as soon as he became king. He decided to break the peace agreements with Saladdin and to gather an army to fight Saladdin and defeat him. The Saladdin and the Kingdom of Jerusalem had treated, and they had a peace agreement. There was a treaty going on. There was no reason for that. In fact, if anything, Saladdin at the time was, whether it was Saladdin or the Zengids, I'm not quite sure, but I think it was Saladdin, was besieging a fortified town called Caesarea, which was one of the towns along with Tiberias, in the lake of Tiberias. So it was a town that belonged to the Count of Tripoli. And really, it was the Count of Tripoli who should have been upset about Saladdin. But the Count of Tripoli was trying to establish, to treat with Saladdin and convince him to stop the siege, and that it should, it should be part of the treaty that there was with the Kingdom of Jerusalem, that it should encompass all the Crusader states, and including him, the Count of Tripoli. So he was trying to treat at the time with Saladdin, and Guy de Lusignan broke the treaty. You can imagine how furious Raymond of Tripoli would have been, because his wife had been blocked in Caesarea, which was under siege. So he wanted to get his wife out. And then Guy de Lusignan decided to break the treaty and go to war with Saladdin. Very arrogant. He maybe after the Battle of Montgizard, where Saladdin had been defeated by Baldwin, he thought that God was on the side of the Crusaders, and he would just destroy Saladdin and whatever, conquer Egypt. I don't know what he had in mind. And so then Guy de Lusignan gathered a huge army. He just called to send heralds throughout the kingdom. Anyone who could bear arms would come to join him. So Reynald of Chatillon came from Kypchak. Was another interesting character. Maybe I should make an intermission, kind of. Maybe I'll say a little something about Reynald de Chatillon at this point. Kypchak was really the only thing in this part of the world. There was a little town here called Elia by the Crusaders. It was called Aqabat later on by the Arabs. But it was a town here. It had an old name, was Eilat, I think. The old Semitic name was Eilat. The Crusaders had called it Ayla, if I'm not mistaken, or Ayla. And there was the only thing, it was Kypchak and this town. The Kypchak and the town were used as stopping stations or whatever for caravans that were heading out for Mecca. So caravans from Medina, or with pilgrims heading for Mecca would either stop in Kerak or in Isla. And at one point, Reynald of Chatillon attacked and raided one of these caravans and confiscated the properties of the pilgrims. And the pilgrims went back to Cairo, and Saladdin was furious about this. This was the event where Saladdin appears with an army, and he appears before Kerak, and then Baldwin comes with another army, and they negotiate, and Baldwin says that I'll take care of Reynald de Chatillon. This will not be repeated. And so this was I'm not sure if there was a confrontation between armies, but there was a request from Saladdin to Baldwin to punish Reynald de Chatillon, and so Baldwin sanctioned him for something. I'm not sure what he did, whether he fined him, what was exactly how he sanctioned him, but something happened. So there was an agreement between the two rulers that he should be punished for that behavior. Of course, Baldwin wanted to preserve the peace with Saladdin, and if he didn't punish Reynald de Chatillon, Saladdin would invade. He did invade in the end. I don't remember what the reason was he invaded, but Saladdin, in the end, he decided to invade. I think they had these peace treaties that will run for 2 or 3 years, and then it came to an end. The term came to an end. In any case, so Reynald de Chatillon was the kind of guy that had the same character as Guy de Lusignan. And so Reynald de Chatillon came with all his knights from Kerak, and all the retinue of the knights and whatever, all the people he could get, all the combatants. And more people gathered from around Gaza and Ascalon, and from the other places, from Acre. And then they marched towards a place called Hattin, it was somewhere here, so east of Acre. The march to that place called Hattin, in the area of the Lake of Tiberias, where Saladdin's army had been active for quite some time, besieging Caesarea and so on. And all the knights, including Balian Ibelin, who was a Frankish knight from France, and Raymond of Tripoli, all the Crusader nobility, as well as the armies and the retinues and the additional knights that were with them, the Hospitallers, the Templars, everybody who could bear arms. The whole kingdom became deserted of experienced soldiers. They all headed for Hattin to meet Saladdin. Now, that was in the summer. You can imagine, in Israel, in the Holy Lands. It was very hot. And Saladdin had encamped around Hattin, and he had ensured he had supplies of water. The Crusader army was a massive army, never seen before, such a huge army raised by the Kingdom of Jerusalem. Probably numbered around 20,000, possibly more. That's really, for those times, this was a huge army. Even the whole of the Byzantine Empire rarely raised such huge armies. 20,000 men is really a lot for that period. And so 20,000 men marched to meet Saladdin in the middle of the height of the summer and the hot weather, in August I think it was. And there were springs or water springs on the way, but there weren't that many, and it was summer. And if you consider 20,000 men and horses, by the time the last man drank some water, the first man was thirsty again. And so it was very difficult to keep that army hydrated under those conditions. And not only that, but I think, if I remember correctly, Saladdin tried to poison one of the wells. There were some wells on the way. The springs, of course, he couldn't poison, but there were some wells along the way, and I think he tried to poison some of the wells. And so then the Crusaders didn't have water supplies. When they got eventually to Hattin to fight Saladdin, they were just parched, dry, and dying of thirst. And of course, there were badly defeated. It was a terrible disaster. Everybody was massacred. Very few people managed to survive. A few knights were on a horse. Among them, Baldwin I, who headed for Jerusalem, and Raymond of Tripoli, who headed for Tripoli. They were among the very few survivors of that battle. They routed away. Yeah? And the rest, those who weren't killed, the majority fought to death, fought to the last. But a few were taken prisoner. Among them, Guy de Lusignan, the king, and Reynald de Chatillon. They were both taken prisoner. And there is a scene where Saladdin gives ice to Guy de Lusignan, who would have been extremely thirsty especially after the battle, which took place in the heat of the day. And then Reynald de Chatillon reaches out to take some of the ice to drink because he was thirsty, and he was executed. And that's a scene. He was killed at that point. Saladdin really very much disliked Reynald de Chatillon after that incident where he confiscated the goods of the pilgrims. And Guy de Lusignan, the king, was taken prisoner. He was eventually released for a huge ransom. The rest, everyone else who was captured, was given a choice to either convert to Islam or they would be executed. And probably the majority got executed. Can you imagine? So that is the story that we see there. Now you can imagine there were like about 20,000 able-bodied, experienced fighters. Anyone who knew how to fight who was in this army. They all got killed. Nobody escaped alive except for a few knights. And who would defend Jerusalem after that? Who would defend the rest of the kingdom? The situation was really dire, and that's where we have these scenes of Jerusalem being besieged and Baldwin I trying to rally all the people of Jerusalem to defend the city, and it tries to organize a defense. But eventually, it was a hopeless situation. He had to surrender. There was no way that ordinary men with, old men and children and women could defend the city from Saladdin. And the deal was that Saladdin agreed to spare their lives, not to massacre the inhabitants, and even to let them free. They could leave with whatever they could carry on them. Each one of them had to pay an amount of money for their lives, and their lives would be spared, and then they could leave. And money was gathered by the Templars from their bank and by any sources that could be found to ransom the people of Jerusalem, who were very many in number, and the majority, it appears, more than 50%. The majority of the population got away on paying a ransom, and the rest just stayed there as, they were enslaved, so to speak. And so I think that's how the movie Kingdom of Jerusalem kind of ends, somewhat sad note. And those were the events. So you get the background now. You understand perhaps a little bit better, hopefully, what happened. Here is the starting diplomat Henry, and the spy. And that was the Kingdom of Jerusalem. Maybe I'll say a couple more things. Is on the issue of the Crusaders. I made a list. Do I have it? Where is it? One interesting thing is the names of the cities we find on the map. The names, a lot of them are Arabic or Turkish, because to date that's what they're called. Well, the Turkish names, some of them only date from the 20th century. They're not really old. The Arabic names are a little bit and older. On the right are the names by which these cities would have been known to the Christians, to the non-Arabs, to the Christians. Yeah. So Arsa would have been Apollonia. Amasya, just the spelling, I'm more familiar with this spelling rather than this one. Aqaba was Isla. This was the city that I said was the other potential stopover on the way to Mecca for pilgrims coming from Egypt. Atalia, again, the spelling is slightly different. I prefer this spelling. Baalbek was called Heliopolis. Corum appears in Kingdom's Crusades. It was a new settlement, didn't exist at the time, Corum. Corum is a modern, relatively more recent Turkish settlement. It didn't exist in the Middle Ages. There was a city nearby, Byzantine city, called Ukaita. Diyarbakir, this is a modern Turkish name given by Ataturk, Kemal Ataturk. The previous name was called Diyarbakir. It was Arabic. The name by which it was known in the Middle Ages, since Roman times or even before, it was an Assyrian name. It was known with that name, Amida. So 1,000 years BC. That's an ancient name. And it had that name until the Middle Ages. When the Arabs conquered the place, they just ransacked and destroyed and razed everything. And then they resettled, they made a tent city and resettled a tribe from the deserts of Arabia, the tribe of Bakr. And they put up some tents and they settled there, and eventually they kind of built a new city on the ruins of Amid or Amida. And the city became known as Diyarbakir, which means the settlement of the tribe of Bakr. And Kemal Ataturk in the 20th century tried to erase the evidence of anyone before living in these places. So he decided neither the Arab name nor the original name were good enough. So he called it Diyarbakir. And this is a modern Turkish name. The Turks don't know any of this. And Diyarbakir was a name that Kemal Ataturk gave in the 1920s to the city. And it means something like victory or something, city of victory or place of victory or something like that in Turkish. It sounds like Diyarbakir, but it wasn't a Turkish, it wasn't a Turkish name before, it was an Arabic name. And so there was a very common practice of erasing the history of whoever was there by changing the names. Damiat was previously known as Damietta. Erzurum, place in modern Turkey, it was Theodosiopolis. Haran had that name, but it was known to the Romans as Carrhae. So there was a battle at Carrhae where the Roman army was defeated. And that was in Haran. But Haran is a local Semitic name. It's not a modern name. Haran is also okay. But the locals knew it as Carrhae. And Hama was the city of Epiphania. So Hama is an Arabic name. Hems or Homs was the city of Amasa. This was Hellenistic cities. Epiphania was named after some king, I think, but could be wrong. Atalia, for example, is named after King Attalus. Heliopolis was named after a temple to the sun that was in that city. And the temple to the sun was a temple to the god Baal, who also had the sun as a symbol. But in later times when the Hellenistic empires sprang up, it was renamed as Heliopolis. Or possibly didn't have Baalbek. Maybe Baalbek is a new name, I'm not sure. But kind of worship to the sun god was established in the city, following the tradition of the worship of Baal. So these are the other names. Karaman is another interesting case. What was there before was Laranda. This was also an Assyrian city. It's a plural. One Lara or Laras, many Laranda. So Laranda is the plural form. And that was also ransacked and destroyed by the Turks. And it was turned into a tent city. And the Turks thought the plains were very useful for their horses. And so they call it Karaman. Or was it Kirsahir? One of those means a great plain. Either Karaman or Kirsahir. One of the two. I don't speak Turkish. But that's a story I've read, that either Karaman or Kirsahir means a great plain. And it was named after that because that was what the Turks were interested in. Kirsahir was called Justinianopolis previously. It was given that name to honor Emperor Justinian. Kayseri was Caesarea. Konya, Iconium. Malatia was Melitene, which means sweet place. Mardin was an interesting one. Mardin, the original name was Martyropolis, if you like, original. I think it had also other names, but it was only a very small place, a very small village at the beginning. And there were some places where monks or ascetic spots, caves and so on in that area. At some point, it might have been during the Roman Empire or later, there was a massacre of some of those kind of monks and some of those early Christians. And so it was at some point renamed Martyropolis. And the bones were placed in a church that was created. And it was the bones of the martyrs who had been killed. And so that was named Martyropolis. It has been renamed to Mardin. And Kahira, of course, is Cairo. Raqqa or Al-Raqqa was named Leontopolis previously, before the Arabs arrived. Sinop is Sinope, and Sivas was Sebastia. So these are some of the interesting names. You can actually change the names if you want. So let's think, what was one? Oh, Baalbek was Heliopolis. Let's see. But they don't control Baalbek. Is any of these? Arsuf? Arsuf doesn't exist. Okay. But you can, in principle, if we had one of those cities, you can go here and you can change the name if you want. If you conquer Baalbek, you can rename it Heliopolis, for example. I'm not going to do this as a mod or as a sub-mod, but I may do it in an alternative version of Broken Crescent if I go one version higher up. And so that's not Kerak, but Baalbek. You can rename it when you capture it. And Byzantine Boy had done that. Crashed. Okay, I'll have to start again. Byzantine Boy had done something like this for one of the later versions of Broken Crescent. How to restart once again. I think basically we're done. I'm not going to restart it. We're done with this episode. So I'll do a campaign in the next few episodes. Let me know if you have a preference. I'm thinking of doing the Rajputs, and I'll do episodes online, kind of, on YouTube. Thank you for listening.